Good morning. Good morning. I'm not on yet. Good morning. I don't think so. She says we're recording, and I feel like we're on. Okay. Well, good morning, and welcome to the March 27th meeting of the Savannah-Chatham County Public School Audit Committee. I will call the meeting to order, and we'll thank everyone for attending. I would like to make one opening remark. We'd like to introduce Bryce Everett, new to the committee. He is a lawyer, and we're excited to have him and his input on everything we're doing. So we now have a CPA and a lawyer. So we're making progress, or maybe not.
No pressure, Bryce, no pressure.
With that, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the agenda. All in favor? The agenda is approved. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the February 6th meeting. Are there any corrections, additions, deletions, or modifications? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the February 6th, 2025 meeting. All in favor? Thank you. And we'll now move to the informational items. Mrs. Underwood.
All right, so if I could just quickly reverse the order. So for the peer review piece that's in there, since we have new members, what we want to provide to you on an ongoing basis is just information about how the internal audit functions, as well as any outside activities that we conduct from time to time. So in that peer review document that you see, I've highlighted some key words and key actions that take place during what we call a peer review. This peer review occurs every 3 years for us. This is a required standard that is required of any yellow book audit shops. And so therefore, I just wanted to break down so you quickly know what this process is and what it looks like. And when we speak the language, you'll have some knowledge of what we're referring to, and nothing more. So if you don't have any questions right now, that is fine. Just email me any questions you have of this simple. And this is a very simplified version of what we experience as yellow book auditors. But I just want to let you know our next one that occurs will be of June 30th, after June 30th of 2026. So it's technically fiscal 27 is when we will bring that to you. All right, so for our new members, so you understand when we have internal audit dashboard, what does this mean? We like to periodically provide you progress reports, basically, of where we are in different statuses. So as each year we have an audit plan, and in those audit plan we have not really set milestone dates of when things will be done, but we do have quarterly projections for us. And then we identify how many days it might take us to conduct based on the identified risk we have preliminarily going in. And so that's where you see the actual to projected. And so this is on this first area under the internal audit dashboard where we show the audit section. This is letting you know what we have completed, we're in progress, and whether we started or not. Now, we are still short that one employee, so we will not be able to get to all this year. So then when that happens, we have to evaluate what will be carried over into the next year. Or if there's higher risks that need to be adjusted, we might not look at this at this point because there may be some other activities that the district is already working on, and we don't want to go shadow over what they're working on, and allow that to, whatever resources they're obtaining from any outside evaluations in order to be able to support them as well. The other services, as auditors, we do not just do audits, we do other services. And what are those other services? We've highlighted areas such as non-audit services, which are basically management requests that are not in the form of an audit by Yellow Book standards. And then we have some internal office activities that includes hotline ethics trainings that we provide for the district. We have district supporting activities that could be what we're doing here. Any of our employees sometimes support the board in attending some of their board meetings, so that support falls underneath them as well. And other district supporting activities also includes consulting activities. And of course, leave and professional growth are as noted. And as for the professional growth behind the monitoring report, you see the CPE monitoring. It is a requirement for Yellow Book auditors to have 80 hours of CPE every 2 years. And in those 2 years, 24 hours of that has to be government-based. So on a monthly basis or bi-monthly, whenever we bring this information to you, we showcase what kind of trainings we have gone to, so you know where our professional money are going to.
Good morning.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And thank you for the interpretation of the dashboard. One of the things that has always kind of felt weird to me when we talk about our schedule is that, you know, we have this vacancy, so we have to shift what we're doing in this unit. And this is kind of one of the few units that gets to do that. It's like where we don't have a full-time teacher, we got to have a substitute. The same kids have to get educated, you know, it has to get done. So it's always felt kind of weird that this unit has a linear relationship between what personnel are present and the number of activities that they're obligated to complete. That's really just a comment more than anything else. But my question about the time that it takes to services, one is about efficiencies. What are the main sources of inefficiency that you experience when you're performing audit activities? Is it cooperation, like it looks like in the report that we're getting today? There are lots of places where documents were not provided, which is not cooperation. Mm-hmm. But what are the other places that contribute to the number of days that it takes to do each of the activities?
So my current analysis of this past year, and I'm not throwing Shauna under the bus because I think she has really stepped up and done great, but she is learning auditing. She's had some basic analytical skills from where she came from, but a lot of the progression of going through the different audits, like I introduced her to business process reviews, and then she had a compliance audit and then the performance audit. So right now, this past year, it has been specifically, you know, just training and being able to come back when we do our reviews and encouraging her to go in this direction and understand to ask these questions. So there's some of that, but collaboration has never been a problem.
Okay.
I can say that. Sometimes what happens in an audit, in a performance audit more than a compliance audit, is once you go in and you look through and you identify processes, then you might find more information or more risks or more areas that haven't been identified that we have to look into. And so sometimes in that process, it can extend that time.
Okay. And so the categories of where the effort goes, if it wasn't this year, if we did like a 5-year average, would be when you peel back, having to process more information?
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah,
Okay.
once you go in and really see the processes and hear the people speak, and then you're trying to identify the gaps within the control processes to the performance outcomes, that's where it can get, you have to go deeper in a performance audit instead of just saying, check, you know, it was a compliance component.
All right.
But I would like to go back to what your previous statement was, because moving forward into next year's audit plan, I will plan to project it based on what we have. For the past 2 or 3 years, I have projected in hopes we would have an employee, but at this point, moving forward, until we have that additional one. So if moving forward, it will be planned based on the staff that we have now, with some backup audits planned, and if that happens, then if we get that new employee and we can add in additional audits, we will bring back the audit plan to the audit committee for an additional approval.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead.
Okay. The next area is the progress monitoring, and this is for each audit, of course, we make recommendations with management action plans, and in those management action plans, management provides us with dates and status of those throughout the year, depending on when the due date. We do check in. If it does say that it is, if the current due date, say for instance, is on June 2025, then what will happen is we wait for that full month to occur. So we allow them through June 30th. That first week of the next month is when we start inquiring the status. Now, does that mean that throughout the year we're not having conversations, or we're seeing changes occur with the recommendations, the actions that they said they were going to conduct? Yes, we do see that, and we do have those conversations, but we formally do not report it out until the next audit committee meeting after the current due date. Does anybody have any questions of that process? Yes.
Yes, this is really cool, that the top of the summary reports, I don't think I noticed this before, the strategic plan KPI results, the percentage that were completed last year, this year, and the requests, let me see, management request for date change. So I think that's a really cool monitor. We use that information in the superintendent's evaluation, and I don't think I noticed it being here presented as information for us before. Have you been doing that and I just missed it?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for doing that. I'm tuned in now. Thank you.
And so I do want to highlight, though, like for every time there's a new audit that adds on, those percentages it's not a firm percentage that you will not always see growth, because as we add a new audit on, that increases the universe of which we have to, develop our percentage from as what's been completed for the year. So that completion this year will be always one that that can change from, from report to report because of that.
I have one question. I noticed on this progress monitoring report, in a lot of areas, there's a lot, the word insufficient is used a lot. So my question is, I think in other reporting, you have recommendations that you give to departments when you do your audit. So when they see this, do the departments get a copy of this, and whatever recommendations are made to kind of improve these insufficiencies that seem to appear a lot, and especially on this particular page?
So the language that you're seeing, and I don't want to assume, so on this page right here, the language that you see right here in these cells, is that what you're referring to, Dr. Robinson?
These pages are numbered, but it's right behind the cover sheet for progress monitoring.
Okay, so right there, that language actually comes directly from the report. That's not new language we've created. That's a summary of the finding. So yes, they are receiving that, and their management action plans are based off of that. Yes.
If you go 2 pages over, that's the summary report, and then each of the management action plan action items are detailed there and based on when they'll be completed. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But management use this report, they use this report to actually make them necessary improvements?
Yes, yes.
Are there any other questions about the management action plan? Okay, I just had a couple. I noticed that the grant process, the original date was July, am I reading this correctly? The original date was July of 2021, and we're now at June of 2025 for the grants?
Yes.
That
That is
seems
correct.
long.
So in that process, it was dependent, and would finance like to speak on this, because I can't speak for your actions during those years? Larry, Rosalind? Yeah.
Yeah, we are still working on the actual process itself. It's not as easy as we thought it was going to be, but we're in the process of putting something together, working with Department of Data and Technology to see if we can have more of a flow chart and a electronic way to keep up with the process, but we're still working on that part. Yeah, we just didn't get a chance to update the date, the due by date in the document, but we will modify the date for that response.
So part of the procedures were established and also the department who handled this also shifted as well. So with that, once the new department had to take on the roles and responsibilities of this, they had to shift into, into understanding the audit, and what do we have to do moving forward and so forth. So those are some of the narratives, also with what's currently being worked on.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So on the grant question, the way that's being, first question is audit being involved in the inquiries that they're making about grant funds in the current administration? Are you responding to any of those taskers when they want to know whether or not activities are being done or completed or any of those sorts of things?
Right, so this is where I mentioned, there was a meeting at one point, I would say within the last year, where the finance team got all their units together to look at how each unit is impacted by a grant and what do they need information-wise in order to reduce any bottleneck issues. And that's one of the things that in that meeting, they were gaining that information in order to create procedures. So they have those financial procedures for themselves internally. So yes, I am sitting at those seats and I am hearing that information. But at this point, as you can see in the remarks from management, those procedures are established. Now they're creating something for the school sites.
Oh, no, what I meant is since January, taskers are coming out about how funds are being spent because there are now disallowed activities. And obviously people know that they're dismantling Department of Education.
Right.
And so they're collecting information to, at least on those who are receiving federal funding, they are asking questions. I was just asking, in some of your non-audit duties, have you been responding to tasking information from?
No, not at
Okay.
all. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
No worries. And then, so along with that, since we're now behind on how we're assessing grants, are we changing our instrument to respond to how grants may be moving forward? Or are we using the same?
I wouldn't say the task is about assessing grant. The task is more about the process. Who reviews the grant?
Okay.
Who reviews whether or not it requires in-kind contributions or a board matching portion? It's more of the management of the grant as far as the initial process. Who approves it? Who's aware of it? Because sometimes we get grants, schools apply for grants, and we are not aware of the grant until a check shows up from somewhere. So it's more about the process itself and not the, per se, management of the grant.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Just roughly, what's the annual dollar amount of grants the district receives?
That I may have to get back with you because the federal grants are pretty easy to put a handle on because we report those in the monthly financials. We would have to go back and look at the amount of grants that the schools get because basically any teacher out of school can apply for a grant. So we have to go back and take a look at that, and we will bring that back to you.
So just bought like tens of millions of dollars?
No.
Millions of dollars.
I would say around about probably no more than 5 million across the district. So it's not a real big number, but it's big enough.
And this is with Title I?
Not including the federal grants.
Okay, because, yeah, okay. So
Not
are you
not
asking
including
all
federal grants.
We have 4 years to refine our grant process. I'm just wondering what's the dollar amount that's not being,
Yeah.
that's my question.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's interesting, because if you're not including Title I, because I'm thinking it's huge because
Yeah,
it's Title
yeah.
I, but if you're not including Title I in this evaluation process, is it because Title I has its own rules and you just got to do what they say?
Yes,
Yeah.
and they
So
pretty
we're
much
not-
have state evaluators that come down and take care of the federal grants and state grants. We're just really focusing
baby
on the
grant.
small grants
Okay, all right. So
that a
so-
school may apply for.
So we're auditing how we handle small grants, which we know we need improvement for because you can, and I've seen this happen in university setting, people apply for it and show up with the grant and Office of Sponsored Research wants to know where it came from.
Correct.
So in terms
That's
of
it.
financial impact, grants are very large, but
Right.
in terms of evaluating how we do them, we limit that to the ones that don't have set prescribed rules. like Title I, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And in the course of that audit, that's where we, when reviewing the process, and I'm not going to quote because it's been a while since we've done this audit, but we did find an account line where funds were just rolling over, and nobody knew where that money went to because of the processes, excuse me, that existed at that time.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just one other follow-up. There's a lot of green on the speech language pathologist, and that's very exciting to see. Is there any update on the number of speech language pathologists we have? Or-
Good morning.
Good morning.
Currently, we have 75 speech pathologists. This includes contracted employees as well. Currently, we will add an additional 7 contracted positions to close out the school year and through the summer to make sure that we're able to provide compensatory program for those students who may have missed services.
And 82 is that's what we need.
Yes, really, I'd like 100, but that doesn't fit in the budget.
Okay, well, that's great news. That's a really good news story that, we got this audit in October, and it looks like, we've got the staff in place for that at-risk population. That's great news.
Yes, in collaboration with purchasing, they have extended contracts so that we can hire additional contracted professionals to make sure that we're able to provide the services that are needed. So right now, we're in a very good place. We should be able to provide every child what they need to close out this school year, and I know that has been a challenge in the past.
Well, that's great news. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's very exciting. Thank you very much. Any other questions on the action plans? All right, Leah?
So the next area needs to be approved. This is the Audit Committee Charter. This was second read. Dr. Hoskins-Brown made some recommendations to the language. And you will find that of the charter as listed. You'll see it page 2, where we added, and it's redlined, at least one of the members of the committee must have an active financial certification, as well as at the end on page 5, we've made a change to, instead of saying regular basis, an annual basis, a report on committee activities to the board on an annual basis. So we do need approval for second read so we can move this forward so Roger can put his stamp on it and we can share it with the board.
Are there any comments on the charter? Not, I will entertain a motion to approve the charter as amended. It's been properly moved and seconded in reverse order that we accept the Audit Committee Charter and pass it on to the Board of Education. All in favor? All right, the charter is approved.
All right, the next area is the external audit student activity funds. This is conducted by Malden and Jenkins, and Hope Pendergrass is here to speak on that.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to come back and speak with you again. Today, we're going to go over the Student Activity Funds Agreed Upon Procedures Report. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is an agreed upon procedures engagement versus what is an audit. So an audit, we issue an opinion. We tell you if things are materially correct. In an agreed upon procedure, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here, it's very much Dragnet style. If you remember Dragnet, what would he say? The facts, just the facts, ma'am. So in an agreed upon procedures engagement, the other difference beyond the fact that we don't give an opinion and that it's more fact-driven is that management pretty much controls what we look at. Whereas in an audit, we determine the procedures that we're going to do in order to give our opinion. So the way this works is management tells us every year which schools we want them to look at. And it's my understanding that the ones we don't look at, internal audits is looking at, so that every school is touched by somebody every year. We do look at all the high schools every year, but then the middle schools, the K-8 schools, and the elementary schools are on a rotating basis. And so management tells us what schools, they also tell us what procedures they want us to perform, but it has to be something that you can answer pretty much yes or no. It's not something that you say is reasonable or is, makes sense. It has to be an evaluative measure that can be answered essentially with a yes or no. So management tells us what they want us to look at, what attributes they want us to test, and so that's kind of how we move forward. We perform the procedures, we report on the results, and it's up to the reader to interpret our results. The reason that I think that this is a better choice for your student activity funds is that it gives you the details of what we looked at and if there were any exceptions. In an audit, you're pretty much, yeah, it's good. So you don't really get to see which schools are having issues, which schools are performing well. So I really think this is a better mechanism for the overarching goal that it's my understanding that you all have for this service that we're providing. We did several procedures. The attachments are included in the report. It looks like we did about 11 different tests for each of the 26 schools. And most of the tests, we did have exceptions. Some of those exceptions were that we were not provided with the information, and so we needed to move forward with closing out our work. So we just reported those as such. Sometimes it might be something that was like, hey, we couldn't read this, we're not really sure what it is, so we cannot come to a conclusion as to whether it's yes or no, so we just pretty much have to say no. I think that's about it. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you all have, or we can talk about specific tests if you would like.
Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So thank you for this report. I've found it really easy to go through and useful. There were places where I wondered whether or not you had cooperation, which is kind of where my earlier question came from, or whether folks were non-responsive or didn't have the materials. Like if you look at a child's grade book and there's a 0, you don't know if they showed up and knew nothing, or if they didn't show up and there's a 0 there. So for the NS's no support documentation provided, was that you sent out a request and you never got an answer, or you got an answer but you never got the material?
So I'm going to ask finance to answer that because the information was not provided to us, but I do
okay.
not know if it was because it wasn't there or if it just was not provided in a timely manner.
Okay. I'll say for Johnson. Groves. Yeah, Johnson, Groves, Windsor Forest Elementary, Southwest Elementary, and Gadsden.
So it's a little bit of both. Some schools did not have the information to provide, and some schools just did not respond. So I think you mentioned Johnson.
Windsor Forest, yeah. Oh.
Johnson High School did not provide their information. They had a change in secretaries, so that was her excuse. She could not find them. Who was the other school?
Windsor Forest Elementary.
They had also had their admin secretary retired. They were not able to find that information.
Okay.
And who else?
Southwest Elementary and Gadsden.
They did not provide it, both schools.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it is.
And Groves.
Groves provided it incorrectly.
I'm sorry?
She said Groves provided the incorrect information, like possibly the wrong year. You have to consider the fact that we're performing these procedures essentially at the start of the school year. We usually start in August type timeframe, and so there has normally been some changeover because we're doing about half the schools. There has been some changeover at some of the schools' bookkeeper. That's just kind of the nature of the operation. So that will occur in some instances.
Are these new secretaries getting the proper training for the onboarding process?
Yes, there's training that occurs during the summer. There's training that's provided during the school year. We have staff that actually go out to the schools and train. So the training is probably, they could be overtrained in a sense sometimes. Part of it is, like they mentioned, it could be a change in administrative secretaries or a change in the bookkeepers. The training is there. It's more of a management, day-to-day management in the secretary's life. And unless you've been in a school, that's kind of hard to understand that they're pulled 1,000 ways. And sometimes the financial side may be put on the back burner because they're focusing on kids and parents and everything else. But But as far as the training, we go above and beyond with the training. And like I said, we even offer staff to go out and sit with the secretaries and as often as they need to. But sometimes, most of the problems that we've seen is just when there's a new secretary and they just haven't had that experience yet.
Okay, thank you.
Can I follow up? I think it's important to consider too that like there was enough schools here that did provide the information and it was valid to know that like the system is in place. I felt like, you know, they should know what they're supposed to do because there was enough compliance to substantiate the fact that while there might be some situations where there's a newer person, this is a known cultural issue. Like they know what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to turn in. Like that's my personal take on it. I do want to point out that you all are one of the few school districts that I work with. And Malden Jenkins works with about 125 school districts and charter schools that actually has a dedicated person to help monitor this. A lot of school districts don't necessarily have someone that kind of coordinates from the central office to the schools. And to be honest, those student activity funds are one of your highest risk areas. I think Leo would probably agree with that. Even though it's a small dollar amount, when you look at your total operation, that's going to be the highest risk area for misappropriation. And even though it's not a huge dollar amount, sometimes it's a large dollar amount to those entities. I mean, if a school is missing $5,000, that's a big deal. Think about the students who fundraised or whatever they might be. That could be crippling to them. So even though this is small compared to your whole operation, having someone who's dedicated, having an internal audit, having your external auditors take a look at it, I think these are all things that kind of put y'all above the rest as far as focusing efforts on this area of your operation.
I just want to make one comment as part of management. You addressed the risk factor, which I was thinking about as well. But the other thing is there should be something in place when you transition. If you got somebody retiring, that they should have information placed somewhere, because I heard that the new person just couldn't find it. And to me, that's unfortunate. If you have an exit process for people leaving a particular position, those information materials should be available. That's just from a management perspective.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. It makes me wonder, you know, what is the standardized record keeping? And there may not be any. Somebody may have a notebook. Somebody may be using a spreadsheet. Somebody may be using Quicken or something like that. I really, again, this report is extraordinarily helpful. I think that what you said was really clear is when you see everybody's making deposits on the same day, and then you have one entity that's holding cash for 2 weeks, you know that everybody else knows you're not supposed to hold cash for 2 weeks. So there's an opportunity to communicate and correct there. So I feel like there probably has been conversations with those folks who have been holding the funds. I'm seeing head nods. Okay. There are two other sets of information from this report that I saw has been helpful. The separation of signatures seems pretty consistent. There are a couple of people who wrote checks, signed checks to themselves, which we know that's not what we're supposed to do. And I am confident that that's being addressed. The legibility of checks is kind of emerging, I think, as a concern, because an illegible signature is kind of that soft slide to fraud. It's like, it's not really fraud. Like, is it my signature? Is it not? You know? So I don't know what conversation we're having around legibility of signatures, but that's something that could have a kind of an insidious effect over time. And then you see 8 years later that this illegible signature was an illegitimate signer or was a ghost signer of some kind. And then, well, two other things. The deficit balances, I'm glad you said something about a school missing $5,000. There is a school missing $5,000. And this, the way we handle student activity funds, it's always a little messy every year. Every time we do a report on these funds, we acknowledge it's a very small amount of money, but it's a place that can erode the climate of the school, the morale of folks who are working with these organizations, you know, boosters and kids selling chocolate bars and that sort of thing, and also community partners that see how their work with a school is, you know, is being affected by how we handle money. So I think paying attention to it is worthwhile. The management response, when I got through reading this report format, I was like, oh man, I really want to know why I got all these NS's and V's in some places, which is why I asked about cooperation. So I think the last cherry on this would be a page at the back where management is responding to the lack of separation of signatures, the lack of documentation, whether or not somebody retired, whether or not they're using a platform that is transferable to the next person who's managing student activity funds. And then finally, what are we doing? What's happening with the money that's missing at these two schools that are missing 4 figures?
May I provide a qualifying or explanatory comment on that?
Yes.
So let me reference back. Okay, so that's the last one. So, you know, there's several clubs and activities with any school bank account. You got high school, cheerleaders, basketball, whatever it might be. The overall, everybody's depositing into the cash account, and then in the general ledger, we're tracking how much money each activity has separately. So it's almost like bank accounts within a bank account, if that makes any sense. And so what we're indicating here is that there are some activities that are overspent. They spent more than what they had. It's not that there's money missing or the bank account is in the red. It's that these specific activities that we've listed have overspent what money they had as part of the whole account.
Okay, thank you. Still not good, but better than what I was thinking.
It sounds to me like the cheerleaders loaned the band some money.
And as far as a management response, that's not really something that's, I guess, part of this type of engagement, but certainly, you know, they could provide that. I'm not going to speak for Larry, but that's certainly something that we've seen others provide separately in response to the very black and white procedures that we perform. So.
Yes, as we move through the audit, like I said, it's more than just the secretary involved, because the secretary can only process the information that's given to her. Most of the sponsors are teachers that are, that's over a club, over a cheerleading team or whatever. So they have a part in the process too. So it's a group of people out of school that's involved in the process that may have a negative effect on the audit. As I mentioned to the board and to my peers, once upon a time in Chatham County, we had bookkeepers. So we had dedicated people that we could train on the finance side that partly reported to finance, partly reported to the principal, but we could more manage those personnel, train them, make sure that they came to mandatory training, they didn't have to get the principal's approval and so on to get there. So as we look at staffing, for board members that we looked at staffing at the last board meeting, looked at secretaries. We're also looking at possibly making some adjustments to add a pretty much, I don't want to call it a bookkeeper, but maybe a financial secretary whose dedicated responsibility is financing, not only student activity, but on the school management side as far as financial side, as far as what they do in Munis on the main operating system, that we can have somebody that's truly accountable for that process, that's really trained, and they have a backup person, but we do have one dedicated person at that school.
Mr. Caldwell?
This is the accountant in me, but the trial balance in the bank rec for one school has a $2,000 difference. That is like missing, or
Which attachment is that? Is it I?
page 6.
Page 6.
Looks like Marshall Middle School. There's a difference in the trial balance of the bank rec.
Yes.
How is that possible?
They didn't really reconcile.
I mean, did someone just like make up $2,000 or?
And we just report on what we saw. The reconciled balance on the bank statement provided to us did not agree to the trial balance for the same period.
Okay. That just seems funny to me.
Thank you for noting that. That's the kind of thing that you want an explanation later in the, in the report, because I wondered about that too. I didn't see it in the last, I saw that in the beginning of this, and then I didn't see it in the deficit. So in that part, what you're saying, that's a true difference in balance missing money. And in this part, in the end of the report, that test is a poor reconciliation of multiple accounts, multiple line items using the same account.
So what he's kind of talking about is the fact that, you have activity that runs through your bank account and you record that activity in your general ledger system. Well, there's always timing differences because you write a check and it might not clear the bank to the next month.
Right.
So there's always reconciling differences. Well, it might not necessarily be that the money is missing. It's just, it's not recorded. We don't know what the difference is between the bank and the ledger. So it could just be that there's a transaction that hit the bank that hasn't been recorded in the ledger, and we don't know necessarily what that transaction is so that we can post it to the ledger and reconcile, and therefore reconcile to the bank. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's money missing. It's just that there's money that hasn't been identified as far as a difference between what transactions have hit the bank and what transactions have hit the books.
Got it. Dr. Watts, is this something that we can examine? Is this something that you can examine for us to be able to determine whether there are training and data management, accounting strengths that we can make versus detecting misbehavior that warrants personnel action? Because we don't, looking at this report, we don't know. It's like the biggest fear is maybe somebody is taking things from hardworking learners, or it could be someone is working and their hair is always on fire and they can't do or are not doing the proper accounting because they're doing this and 8 other things. Is there a way we can kind of find that out so we're not in the position of being 18 months down the line and finding out, oh man, somebody really was stealing and we were non-reactive and should have been?
It would be difficult for me to extrapolate the difference just with this information alone. So when I look at this, it could be that the person is new. Truly, we do not have anybody in a school dedicated to finances. So they're doing finances, they're answering the phones, they're doing other they're doing a lot of different things. What I would probably suggest, and I don't know if this is the right methodology, just from the top of my head, is that we look at trends and patterns around other financial transactions and how they're documented, and where we see other issues and we can match it to this, then to me, that is an employee issue. But if the person is new, and this is their first time having to respond to this, I would say it's probably just we need a transition plan when people leave and come into new roles. It's what you said. That I wouldn't necessarily say it was a performance issue. I would need to look at different data points to say, oh, there's a trend and pattern here.
I support that because it's protective of the work environment for the employee. It does make me, I still kind of feel like there needs to be something more definitive with the individual. Like, when I have been treasurer, so I have been an organizational treasurer, I have been the organizational chair of internal audit. When I was a treasurer and a reconciliation didn't match up, I got a call that said, you need to bring all your documents and you need to make this make sense. And by the internal auditor, after they did the report, they said, here's the report, here's a finding. You know, we need your reaction to the finding. We need you to explain why we're seeing what we're seeing. Do you have documentation to show something different?
Absolutely.
And
Okay.
that may have taken a day or so of me digging through records, figuring out, or saying, no, I screwed up. I screwed up in March of this year, and my bad, sorry. So I think that there is something in between, there's a conversation between trend analysis and somebody being terminated on something that may, you know,
Right,
there's
right.
something in between that, some notification that says, we're failing to meet a standard. Do you have an explanation?
Ma'am?
Please.
Good morning, everyone. To give you some comfort, these accounts are are reconciled on a monthly basis. So each one of the schools, they have a deadline of the 25th of each month to reconcile their bank account to their system. So we have an electronic system where all of the transactions are input for the schools. It's called School Cash. So there is a platform for all of the school student activity funds where all the transactions are being accounted for, and they are reconciled to the bank account each month. The schools are tasked with having to have the reconcilements to the accountant by the 25th. Now, where we run into problems is exactly what Dr. Watts has said. It's a timing issue. With some schools, we have to be after a little bit more, calling them saying, okay, it's past the 25th, we haven't received your report, this type thing. But we have procedures in place. And as was said also, when we have a change in staff, we have teams that will go out to the schools if they ask for it. If we see that there's an issue with some of their reports, we contact the principals, and then we actually go out and sit with them. I think over the past month, we may have gone out to 4 or 5 schools. So we have the position, the processes in place. It's the importance of the job that's being put on it at the different schools and the transitions with the staff. Some people have more accounting or finance experience than others, so those we have to spend a little bit more time with, teaching them the transactions and how the work should be processed.
And I also want to just add that there's an additional layer. I think Mr. Jackson mentioned this as well. It's a collective responsibility, not only with the administrative secretary or bookkeeper, but each of the sponsors also receive training. So there's a lot of work and collaboration that has to take place between that bookkeeper, that sponsor, and that principal. And to the point that was made, this is happening on a monthly basis. So a lot of this is also contingent upon that sponsor making certain that he or she is completing all of those processes as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. As you were speaking, I was having a deja vu, and I was like, I think she told me this last year. I think I said this last year, and I think you told us this last year, that there is that clearing process at the end of the month. So that's the opportunity to catch a problem. So some of these things that we say in here could be artifactual of just the documentation.
Could be.
Could be. Okay. Thank you. I really
May I
appreciate it.
offer a comment?
Ms. Campbell had a comment.
Okay.
So I think that's really good to hear that we have a process in place with accounting that calls. So I guess what I understand is one of the issues is that we don't have a specific person that's been designated that, like, who would you call from accounting? And, okay, but at each school?
There is a person
At each school.
designated, but that's not their only job.
Understood. So even though that person's designated, when you call, their job is too differentiated in the sense that they have a lot going on.
They're a secretary in a school, so they're answering phones. When parents come in, they're handling those transactions. They're doing multiple the dynamics of a front office.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to share how another large school district that we work with kind of handled this, not necessarily as a recommendation, but just to kind of share how someone else has handled that. While you all do have a dedicated person at central office that oversees these accounts, you still have so many schools with one person. And so what that school district did was they fleshed out that staff a little bit and assigned like a group of schools to each of these additional individuals so that you didn't add a person at every single school, but maybe you added one to a zone or whatever to provide additional support to the new people, to make sure that maybe they were doing tests every quarter, like just doing little spot checks every quarter so that when we got to the end of the year and we were looking at it or Leah's team was looking at it, they didn't have any issues because they'd already been addressed during the year. So that's not a recommendation, it's just telling you how another district approached it.
I'm very much used to having a school-level bookkeeper, though. So that's the model that I've accustomed to. Having somebody doing multiple jobs when it comes to money is not a best practice, I would say. But that's the model we have until we change it.
No, that's what she's saying, that the secretary does the books, answers the phone, checks out kids, you know, does,
Chasing these sponsors down
And
to
some
get the
attendance.
dollars. They're
yeah,
doing all
handles
that.
attendance, so they're wearing many hats instead of just being dedicated to taking the money.
Yeah. Right now, when we speak of bookkeeper, we're talking about the secretary.
We don't have a bookkeeper position.
Any other comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I will entertain a motion to recommend the external audit of student activity funds to the Board of Education. It's been properly moved and seconded that we accept the audit. All in favor? We'll send it to you, Mr. Moss.
Thank you.
Our next meeting is the 24th of April, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.